guys, thanks for tuning in. This is my interview with Mick Gordon from some years back on his work that he did on Doom when they brought that back. This is by far one of my favorite game soundtracks for what it does for metal, heavily influenced by maybe something like Meshuggah and just those really, really hard-hitting metal bands. The sounds he's created were done pretty organically. He did a lot of crazy cool stuff to create those, a lot of unconventional ways and a lot of ways that were completely outside of my realm of thought. But that's why Mick Gordon is so good at what he does. Hopefully I'll have one coming up for the upcoming Doom Eternal if our schedules work out correctly. So without further ado, my interview with Mick Gordon.
I can't say enough good things about it, but you're probably tired of me kissing your ass about the soundtrack at this point, probably.
Oh, dude, look, I really appreciate that, man. I'm so glad you're enjoying it.
When you came down to this, was it just like, what kind of instruments did you have in mind, and what kind of feel were you going for? Did you kind of like say, okay, we'll tie in what we're doing from the classic and bring that in, or did you just start out fresh? I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of its own material to kind of derive from, to kind of get your own thing going, right?
Right. So, I think you bring up some great points there. Obviously, first, thanks so much for the the positive vibes, man.
Sure,
I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think there's a couple of things there. Number one, like, I'm really inspired by the music and video games that we had during the 90s, right? So you would have an awesome, Super Nintendo game or whatever, and the soundtrack would be really cool. It was like the composers just wrote songs instead of actually trying to, write a, score as such, right? So a lot of that music in the 90s, you could literally just pull straight out of the game and listen to it in enjoyment. I still listen to that stuff now, the Donkey Kong Country stuff, obviously the Killer Instinct stuff, the stuff that the Rareware guys were doing back in the day then, the amazing Japanese composers that were making some really, really, really incredible music for those games. So for some reason, I don't really know why, but in the game industry, we started to move away from that stuff and go more into the realm of what some people call like underscore or background music, which is just music that kind of sits in the background and it's there to be subconsciously noticed. And that sort of stuff certainly plays a role. It has a emotional impact. So when you're playing, it can make you make you feel certain things in certain ways, which is cool, and that certainly plays its role. Doom is, it's a different experience. It's a very aggressive, up close, fast, punch, punch, punch sort of experience. And it needed a soundtrack that harked back to those days of, cool music that was playing in the background. So that's number one there. Number two is I try to look for games and projects whenever we're looking at doing something that gives me an opportunity to, write interesting music and come up with cool ideas and stuff that works really well with the gameplay and doesn't, as I was saying before, just sit as kind of background music. And Doom really, really fit that bill in a perfect way.
When I can't remember exactly the dialogue that happened, but I just remember in the sequence in the game. And if you guys haven't played Doom, go play it. Stop the podcast right now. Go play it. I'm going to talk a little bit about the game, and they're not massive spoilers. I haven't finished the game because I'm playing it on ultra violence because I wanted to give me a challenge and
nice,
that sort of thing. I wanted to kick my ass. I mean, that's the kind of weird thing about this Doom is it's fun to have it beat you up. Maybe that's why some people like Dark Souls. I don't know. I haven't been able to play Dark Souls yet, but I just remember that opening sequence when this voice is telling you about what they've been doing with all these experiments. This is for the betterment of humanity, and after that, your Doom Marine is like riding this elevator, and the way the title segues in with this big metal coming in, this sound that is so full and hard hitting, I was just like, fuck yes, I am sold, I am in. And dude, I just I kind of at that point, I already had my suspicions that this was going to be right on the money, but that just kind of solidified it for me. It was.
I'm glad.
I'm not sure if you guys take that kind of focus and like, hey, we got to nail this title sequence. I don't know if you guys go into that type of thing or if you just kind of put it together and it sort of.
Yeah. That way. Well, I'm glad you feel that. I'm glad that kind of resonated with you. It's really cool when kind of doing that stuff. Yeah, that's really cool. I know with Doom, the team really wanted to just be like straight into it. None of this sort of setting up or any of that sort of thing. Just bang, here's a gun, go shoot some things, and that's it. Doom's really interesting because there's really no way that you can explain it that summarizes what the experience is like. Doom for me is a game that I'm talking about Doom 2016 here. Of course, the original Doom had this as well, but Doom is an experience that you need to have while playing the game. It's not something you can really explain through text. It's not something you can explain really even that well in a trailer. It's until you sit down with a controller and feel the game and kind of experience it that way, the way it's meant to be experienced. That's when it kind of starts to resonate. And the whole
Totally
idea, I
true.
guess,
That is absolutely true. I never really thought
right.
of that, but that's absolutely dead on the money. It's like its own brand. It's its own, almost like its own genre in certain
Right,
ways.
right. And it's really difficult, I mean, to say like, yeah, they just give you a gun straight away and you start shooting things. I mean, people will be like, oh, well, that sounds, pretty slow, right? Pretty boring, maybe. But as you know, like when you get a hold of Doom, if you're into it, it really just kind of grabs you very, very quickly. So that whole opening sequence there was just a way of, expressing that. There's probably a bit of like bravado, sort of, confidence happening in that, opening scene as well. We've got Doom guy riding in the elevator, and there's some guy telling him he can't do this and he can't do that, and always laying this law down. And Doom guy's just punching the screen and picking up the shotgun and off he goes to rock out. Yeah. But it's funny though, like that original track, I had it timed completely different. And when I heard it play back in the game, I was like, oh no, it's wrong. It's not working correctly. And then it got to the end where it's like da 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 da, and then right on the beat, Doom guy goes with the shotgun.
Yeah.
I was like, oh cool. And dude, I had
Yeah.
the id Software team with that. That's not something I planned. I just threw them in the music, and those guys put it in like that.
So they know what's going on as far as the complete package of how the music and the sound are going to go together. That sounds like you got some guys who know what they're doing because.
The sound team there are absolutely phenomenal. They're a really, really, really cool bunch of guys for sure.
And hearing that was kind of almost part of the collaborative process without even you really aiming for that. It's just man, just they got the right people involved. It's just when you play the game, you understand the theme and the feel that you have, and it's like you mentioned, it's hard to describe exactly what it is about Doom that is so it pulls you in so much. But I've tried to explain that to people, and it's just kind of like I come across as like, yeah, it's just this shooter. And when we have so many shooters to choose from these days, back in the day when Doom came out, it was like first it was Wolfenstein when I was a kid, and then after that Doom. Wolfenstein I'd only tried a couple times, but Doom was like this probably the first shooter that ever introduced me to this being in like a realm, like inside of this other dimension while being in a shooter, while being kind of creeped out, but also kind of campy and kind of that way. So it is kind of hard to convey that in speech, but it seems like once people get to sit down and try it out, this including my wife, who I was trying to convey this to, who had kind of missed the Doom, the early days of Doom, she started enjoying it, getting into it, seeing why I liked it.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool to hear. Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's cool that we've gone back to that experiential sort of video gaming thing, right? Which I really really appreciate. And that's the stuff again, sort of bringing it back to the '90s sort of video games. I think these days, there's so much choice when somebody sits down to actually put some money down on a video game as a form of entertainment. So to try and like introduce them to Doom if they haven't played it before, and to kind of give them that first time experience, that's kind of a tricky thing. And as I was saying before, it's very difficult to illustrate that in a trailer. It's very difficult to illustrate that in text or in a press release or something like that. It really is until you sit down and actually kind of play it, which is great though, because to me that's the essence of a video game. You mentioned Dark Souls before too. I'd put that in the exact same category. It looks great in trailers.
Yeah.
They do some great trailers, but it's not until you kind of sit down to experience the game on its own and how it's meant to be played that you understand it.
I think so, because I was watching Good Game, a show that I enjoy watching down here. It's I never really had anything like that I saw made back in the U.S. And I'm watching Baggio playing Dark Souls and seeing how angry and freaked out he's getting. But what that looks like on the surface, and what I've seen from most Dark Souls players, is that it kind of sparks that type of hype in you. And on the surface, it looks like, well, this guy's just getting pissed off at the game.
Right.
But the reality is what it's doing is tapping into this kind of like this primal excitement, this whole survival aspect where you actually do feel like you're fighting for your survival rather than just kind of the person behind the camera just kind of seeing this narrative play out. Like I feel like games like Doom, like Dark Souls, they've accomplished where it actually puts you in the game, makes you feel like you are in this other dimension, this completely other world.
Right, it's all about that sense of achievement, really. And I think a lot of modern games have that too, especially multiplayer games. Obviously, really focus on that sense of achievement. Banding together as your team, or your lone soldier, or whatever you're going to be playing as, right? And if you're doing really well at that multiplayer game, that's a real big sense of achievement that's happening there. And single player games, it's really great when you get to introduce that into the single player experience as well. And for me, Doom, wandering around and finding secrets and stuff like that, you get that sort of uplifting feeling, which I haven't had in a game myself for a long time either. So,
Yeah.
kind of.
I know that I've heard that there's a rumor floating around that we have like classic maps in there somewhere, and I'm really excited to see what that's like, if it's actually true. But it's like you said, like bringing in the multiplayer feel into the single player is something you don't see very often. And I feel like when I'm playing that, it has the intensity of where I feel like I'm playing online. Maybe it's the quality of the AI and the speed of everything and that type of thing. I'm playing on PS4, and I know that people have really nice PC rigs, and I'm sure it's even more intense because of the frame rates and the high resolutions, that sort of stuff. But I'm just absolutely thrilled. I remember there's a scene of a level, I think it was called like Cladigir's Sanctum or something like that. I probably just totally botched that pronunciation. but God, the music you have right there, it kind of brought into my mind like the early days of when I was listening to Anima from Tool, when there was this kind of like it has this darkness to it, but also this exciting factor to it. It's not so much just strictly scary dark. It's like this kind of intense, kind of hyperactive dark type of sound. And you blended in. You had choirs going on. You had these huge drums sounding, and it sounds like you might even have an 8-string guitar going on there, if I'm correct. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the instruments that you would use for that? Like, what were some kind of like the key instruments to, I don't know, put such a big sound?
Yeah, it's honestly, I don't even think of it as instruments, to be honest. And really, if I showed you what instruments I think those things were, you'd be really surprised. A lot of the time, they're real basic sort of building blocks of sound, like real basic synthesis stuff. So I'm talking about like sine waves, talking about noise, but it's how you treat those sine waves and noise through all sorts of different pieces of analog equipment and stuff. But by that, like what I'm doing there is just trying to come up with a part, like a musical part that sits within the music that I'm trying to build it for there. And so it's not really like a traditional instrument that you can pick up and play. It's like a part that's specifically designed, sound designed, musically designed to fit, to say something within that special moment there. Obviously, there is traditional instruments in there. There's guitars, which we try to do some different things with. We've moved away from that kind of, 80s thrash metal sort of sound into sort of lower register things that sound a lot bigger. So there's 7-string guitars, there's 8-string guitars, there's even 9-string guitars.
Oh wow.
There's bass guitars and things like that. Obviously, that's real sort of staples. They're what are called doom staples. That's the sort of stuff like if you sit down, you say eat a pasta or something like that, right? If you sit down, there's no pasta in the pasta. You're going to kind of be like, well, I kind of ordered pasta, right? So with Doom, it's like if you get a Doom game, you're going to expect those staples. So if it's a pasta, you're going to have pasta. You're going to have tomatoes, right? Or tomatoes, wherever we're looking at this from.
Yeah, I'm used to saying tomato now, so I'm
tomato. There you go.
I'm with you, man.
You've assimilated, brother.
Exactly.
So there's definitely those Doom staples. The drums, the idea behind the drums is that, let's face it, like the music that I'm writing here is made to be played underneath screams and gunshots and explosions and all sorts of really big, loud sounds. So the kick drums, the toms, the snare drums, any other drums that I'm putting in there need to survive next to that stuff. Yeah. So that's kind of why I usually try to push them a little bit harder, a little bit bigger. But yeah, there's certainly a big component of the Doom score is not even what I would call an instrument. It's like musical sound design is kind of what we call it here, but there's really no, appropriate term that kind of describes it. But it's certainly something that's designed specifically for that specific moment, essentially.
Well, I like the fact that you kind of focus on the design aspect of it. It is kind of an alchemy type of process when you consider the different components required to create those sounds. Like you do have your staples, you have your basic pasta, your basic tomato, but what other ingredients you throw in there to make it into something, whether it's going to be this is carbonara or this is bolognese or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I'm still learning a lot of these new. In fact, I never heard of bolognese until I was here, and I may be completely wrong right now.
Well,
I don't know.
sauce, you'd know that as. That's just sauce.
Okay, so it's like what you're putting into the sauce, right? Like
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
different components to what you're putting in there that will completely change how that pasta is going to, what kind of dish that's going to be at the end. And so I feel like when you have these different instruments, you could pick them out, but they definitely do survive in that wall of sound going on in the gameplay when you have all the screams, the giant, hell knights jumping up in the air and smashing the ground, screams of that thing that spawns those other ones like flying past you. There's so much sound going on. I think it is its own achievement that your music does stand out within the middle of that without just being, just the fact that you guys are able to dial that in and have it enjoyable and really support what's going on. I think that's a pretty big achievement because there is a lot happening there, man.
Well, again, man, I got to throw credit to the audio team at id Software there, and those guys. I just make big loud noises and hit things and throw it over to those guys, and they're the ones that kind of get it in the game and make it sound really good and stuff like that. So, there's full credit to those guys, man. Mad respect to those guys.
It's just it's amazing, and the fact that I think that you were allowed the space to have the action type of setup, but it had no shame, I guess, in being a metal sound, because I know that there it goes between orchestral and this sort of thing, but I feel like sometimes metal is strictly just for certain genres where I haven't really heard a lot of metal, at least at this type or maybe your brand. I haven't heard something that it was like distinctly, yes, this is like some of that stuff that I miss and that I love and that I actually listen to on its own anyway from a lot of different bands. But the way that it blends into this Doom experience, it feels like an achievement. Like I said, banging my head while playing a shooter, while getting my ass kicked, while jumping around. That's never happened with me before.
Oh man, well, I really,
in gameplay for me.
Super appreciate that. Thank you so much. I guess again, like the idea with that was to try and break down the components there. So not just have straight metal tracks, because I mean that's cool, but like you could just grab any metal track and throw it over the top of it.
Yeah.
And it would totally work. But when you're doing the score, when you're doing a soundtrack thing, I try to like break the components down. So instead of having like guitar and bass and drums doing this whole big 7-minute craziness or whatever, sometimes we just need like a 9-string going bow, or playing like a big rhythm or something like that. And when you put that over it and you take out all the extra stuff, the additional stuff, it kind of it makes it more impactful, which isn't really a word, but we use it a lot anyway. But it has a lot of yeah, right. It has a lot of impact, basically. So yeah, it's broken down into the components. So it's like, taking what makes metal and just taking the components out individually and then presenting those components on their own. Not so much as like a full arrangement, just those little components on their own. And of course, what happens there is that people hear that and they hear like distorted guitar and they go, oh, metal and things like that. But it's not trying to sit within a genre. It's just trying to use that sound for its function. And its function there is to be aggressive and to cut through the mix in a specific way. And that's Doom, I feel. Doom just isn't, throwing metal tracks over gameplay. Sure. It's trying to find whatever, sound represents that brutalness at that time.
Exactly. And to say it's metal, at least from my perspective, isn't necessarily to diminish what the entire thing is, but I think it's because of what I like in metal, is that there's a lot of stereotype of, oh, bro, that's metal as fuck, bro.
Right.
You hear that. You hear that, and it's like, yeah, I get why there's that stereotype, why people do say that, but the reality is the reason why I like metal is because it supports these types of feelings when it's like this aggressive feel, which, yes, I enjoy the work of many other composers that don't even go even close to that type of thing, but I feel like it's one of those genres that should be included in the mix and respected just as much because it taps into a human emotion that I think Doom supports, because you have these big epic battles where you're fighting these monsters from hell. It needs to be aggressive. It needs to have that feel to it.
I'm glad you picked up on that, man. That makes me feel really, really awesome. And I'll tell you why, right? Is that when we sat down to kind of like figure out what the music should really say, what happens is you try to look at, well, what's the central kind of theme of the game? Now, of course, everybody will say, well, it's, guns and shooting demons. It's like, yeah, that's true. But what's the underlying kind of, commentary there? What's the underlying feeling there? And to me, it's about social isolation there. You're the single Doom guy up on this UAC base up on Mars, right? And there is literally no human being left on Mars, and you are miles away from Earth. So that's social isolation. You have absolutely nobody else there to help you. So it's all about you. So there's two things that come with that. One is the abject loneliness, which is why a lot of the music kind of takes those elements and presents it on its own. So it'll take a guitar part and just present the guitar part on its own. Sure, there's other stuff happening in the background, but it's not like a full band. The second part of that is the sheer weight of it all. So the massive sound that we try to get in there to come out at you is to try and represent that you are that kind of one individual army by yourself, right? So you're socially isolated, but you're also an individual army that has a lot of weight on their shoulders. So I'm super glad you picked up on that.
Yeah, I think it supports that feeling, and also it breaks kind of what you have come to experience more often than not is the survival horror experience, where it's kind of like, oh shit, this stuff's coming to get me, that type of thing. Well, it's like sometimes it would be cool to play the guy who's like, all right, this stuff's gonna come and get me. Let's do this. Let's throw it down. And because
you brought up a really interesting point there, because we had that discussion on the team. Survival horror is where you are scared of whatever else is in the world, right? But with Doom, the everything else in the world should be scared of you. You're the Hellslayer. You're the one there that's kind of there to kill them all. So, if you're a demon there, you're kind of, the demons are fighting for their life just as much as you are.
Right, and that's where I think that it has its own kind of brand. Is it looks on the surface like with the whole the Doom hell kind of landscape. It seems to be very horror influenced, and you usually think, all right, creepiness, scary corridors, and a little bit of paranoia. Where in Doom, it's like, yes, I have that, but I'm also gonna kick the shit out of these guys. It brings that feeling to it that I don't think you really find a lot. At least I don't see very often in survival shooters like that. I mean, I know I'm a huge fan of Dead Space, but I would only, very seldom would I feel that moment when I felt like I was kicking ass and taking names. It was more of like, oh shit, as I'm shooting whatever came at me. Now I know that's what they were going for, and I think it's a killer experience. But I think it's refreshing when you have this in Doom, where it's the complete opposite of that. It's like you are surrounded by monsters, but you're also in your own way kind of a monster yourself, and you're going to show them.
Yeah, and I mean, Dead Space is very, very revered. It's a great franchise.
Oh, absolutely.
We're huge fans of Dead Space as well. I'm a huge fan of Dead Space. And because of that, because we're big fans of it, we've got to acknowledge that exists in the world. It is doing its own thing. Dead Space already exists. Mm-hmm. So, of course, we're not going to go and just do the same thing, right? Exactly. Doom needs to be its own thing. Doom needs to be Doom. And there was definitely like that discussion where Doom needed to be just like that sort of, 90s Doom 1, Doom 2 experience, which is it's really, really quick. It's very, very violent. It's very up close in front. And, it's just that cool kind of, it's that cool thing of like jumping into a room, picking out your weapon, quickly identifying what enemies are around you, and then being very tactical and on the move. And that's something that's a very unique Doom experience.
Well, I'm absolutely 100% satisfied. I think a lot of my friends may think that you're a Doom fan anyway, but there are so many ways that this could have been kind of just lukewarm, kind of like, oh yeah, it was a decent, reboot. It was okay. There's so many ways it could have been that, but it totally wasn't. It was the exact kind of feel that I think the reboot that the franchise deserves. That it's a respected name. It's something that goes into our history as gamers. I mean, I think when I was a kid, like I said, Wolfenstein was my first person experience, but then Doom was the one that actually taught me about atmosphere and first person shooting.
Right. Yeah, totally. And I mean, full credit. That's total credit to the id Software guys, man. That team there. Like, all I do, as I said before, is just sit in my room all day and bang things and shout and, all that sort of business. So, full credit to those guys, all the atmosphere. If it works, basically, if the game works and it's fun to play, it's all because of those guys, man. They spent so much time and so much sacrifice on that project.
Well, let's definitely tip our hat to them and give them their due credit, while also giving it to you, because the whole thing coming together is just a sonic treat. It's just absolutely sonic bliss. Oh, hey guys. If you're wondering what this weird transition is right now, where I'm talking to you rather than inside the interview, it's because I'm trying to segue into a segment of discussion that me and Mick had after the interview that we decided we should include in the podcast. It's very technical stuff with some of how he created these crazy sounds, but I think it's worth checking out because they're such fascinating sounds to listen to. You might take some interest in learning how he did it. So here we go. Check this out. What you're talking about is just sending signals and circuits through actual physical synthesizers. So it's like a manipulation of an actual sound wave.
Yeah, so a lot of those sounds just become a lot of those crazy synth sounds and stuff. We wanted to find a new and interesting way to treat synthesis. I think synths really have a role in Doom for two reasons. One, because obviously it's a really cool kind of like industrial and futuristic type of sound. But number two is I think Doom has got a really strong legacy of technological achievement. Obviously, the original Doom was such an amazing, obviously not the first-person pseudo 3D or impression of 3D shooter, but certainly, the most well-known. So technological sort of stuff has got a real big, strong place in Doom. So I wanted to find a new way of doing synthesis. And we didn't want to just do the kind of boring sort of, dubsteppy type synths and stuff that are out there at the moment, that sort of FM synthesis stuff or whatever. So what we ended up doing, right, after a big look of discovery and stuff, trying to figure it out, I got really inspired by these concepts of hell. So these concept art pictures, basically the team would send me concept pictures as we would go just to kind of spark inspiration. Yeah. And these concepts of hell just looked amazing because they had these massive big monoliths of like giant rocks and different structures that were broken apart and floating in midair. Yeah. And they were exposing the underlying energy underneath. So like some of those things have a big giant rock and a big broken rock underneath that, and there's like this glowing energy going in between them. Yeah. So I was like, hey, well, why not like focus on this concept of evil energy? Imagine if like we're able to harness the evil energy from hell, and you could run all of your electronic systems and like that on this hell energy. So you'd be talking on your phone or whatever, and it's being run on hell energy or something like that. Anyway, it sounds a lot better in my head.
Well, no, it's kind of like I saw a few rock platforms floating there, thinking, I like what you're doing with the place, Satan. It's pretty cool the way you got this thing
right,
float here like that.
Yeah.
But I imagine that
Satan's like, man, you should check out the utility bill.
Yeah, I'm like, wait till you see the bill. Yeah. But I think it's badass that you've kind of gone into the symbolism of what actually creates the world itself, what makes it actually function in some ways.
Right, yeah, exactly. So then to kind of illustrate that, what it did is took the bare building blocks of sound, which are sine waves and noise. Literally every single sound is at its base is a sine wave and noise, right? And when I say noise, I mean white noise. So what I do is construct different parts out of sine waves and noise, and then feed these through large analog arrays of equipment. So this would be different synthesizers, different pedals, different tape machines, different compressors, different EQ equipment, whatever. Whatever the equipment was didn't really matter. The idea, though, was that the sine wave, being such a pure representation of basic sound, was capturing whatever that piece of equipment was imparting onto the sound in the most pure way. So I wasn't using it as an effects processor, even though that's what it's designed for. I was using it as a way to capture whatever that piece of equipment does to sound. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's like, what does it do with that sound, and what kind of circuits is it going to route it through? What kind of ways does it manipulate the actual white noise?
So what it do is like send out, say, 4 channels of different rhythms of, you know, sine waves and noise from a Mac rig, and then run it through say 4 different arrays. So you might have array 1, array 2, array 3, and array 4. Some of these arrays would just be pure analog equipment. Some of these arrays would be sent out to feedback. So I'd have a speaker in the room with a microphone at the other end, and I'd be feeding a little bit of the microphone signal through the speaker. So when the sine wave and noise would drop out of the speaker, it would start to feed back, and you get some really cool sounds that way. And then I'd literally just kind of automate the gain amounts being sent from the Mac rig, so you'd get sort of rhythms pulsing through this analog equipment.
Would you program an up and down kind of thing and do it steady at a rhythm, or would you find yourself getting your hands on and kind of doing it, you know, with a more hands-on type of thing where you're like sliding it physically, that type of thing, to create some of these sounds?
Yeah, so some of them are definitely physically, because I find some of them, once you've got this really large like analog array up of like 20 different pedals, for example, the moment you like turn one little knob at the beginning of the chain, it really just completely changes the sound, because that is then changing the sound that runs into every subsequent pedal, right? So yeah, sometimes I'd sit there and actually just move those knobs automatically. Some pedals and things allow you to allow CV signal, so you can send a CV to it, so you can actually change it on the fly. Other ones, yeah, you just have to do it the old-fashioned way and use your hands and get on and twist things.
I like that it seems to symbolize what you're talking about with the whole like crazy energy, because like the thing is about a sound wave is that and it's just white noise. It's the manipulation of it and how you've manipulated it. You've taken something and distorted it, created it something else completely different. And in some ways that symbolizes the distortion of your environment that you're normally familiar with, which is, planet Earth. You go to hell and your sense of reality is completely messed with, which I think they nailed great in Doom. One of my favorite things about the Doom, franchise and its history, but they did really well with this new one. But I like the fact that you focused on that for the approach for symbolizing that in the music, and you actually literally, physically hands-on rigged up a system where it manipulated white noise to create crazy sounds.
Yeah. And again, that just kind of was born out because I wanted to do some synthesized sort of sounds. But I don't know. I was talking to Sonic Mayhem the other day, and I was asking him about his Quake 2 score. I was such a huge fan of that score, right? Yeah, exactly. He's such a huge fan of that Quake 2 score. And he said something really interesting where he was like, yeah, back then there was no plugins. And I was like, yeah, to create some of those sounds like Descent into Cyberon and things like that from the Quake 2 score, I'm like, man, just to try and recreate that stuff with plugins is really difficult. But because they didn't have plugins and wasn't able, bare basic plugins, but he had to create all that sort of stuff in the real world using synthesis machines and sequences and, different bits of equipment. So it kind of made him think in a different way. And I guess going back to, taking it out of the computer, it forces you to think of things in a different way as well. You're not so focusing on, different numbers and what you can see. You're focusing instead on what you can hear.
And it kind of brings in the whole actual expression type of thing back into it rather than just being a technician.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you're also capturing something really unique. What's really cool about some of these old synths and things that I have here is that once you set up that sound, you've got 30 seconds to capture it because stuff starts to waver after a little while. Oh. So literally set up the synth and things, you start recording, and then just because of the craziness of it, as we were saying before, this Soviet Polivox that I have from 1982, Soviet era. So yeah, the Soviets made really great synthesis sort of stuff. Really great synths. But anyway, so opening that up, as I was saying before, it's like MacGyver inside. It is literally held together with Band-Aids and, bits of paper clips and black magic and I don't know, all sorts of madness in there. And there's bits of string holding cables on, really important cables and stuff.
Wow. Wow.
Magnets. There's magnets in there holding stuff to different things. It's extraordinary. Looking inside, you're like, wow, how does this thing even work?
So do you just plug it in and hope there's not an electrical fire, or do you have some that could repair that, or do you know how to repair something like that?
It doesn't draw too much electricity, so it's not like
Oh,
super.
okay.
It's not like 6 amps across the chest.
You walk into your studio and it looks like a Tesla type of setup.
Yeah, dude. That being said, I've blown up so much equipment in this room, it is not funny, especially setting up these large arrays. I'm like, hey, sure, this little pedal can handle 300 decibels, and it's like, no. But yeah, so anyway, like the Soviet one there, it has such a great sound, but it's completely impractical, meaning that it just, like, I wouldn't tour with it because it's just all over the place. You can't track it. You don't know what key it's in, what note it's holding, and it moves. And certainly my modular rig, when you turn that off and turn it back on again, it sounds different. It's weird, so.
Wow, so it really is down to the core of the actual power going through.
Yeah, but that's music too, like that's music. It's just the same as playing in a band or sitting around with a bunch of people and just jamming, right? What you're capturing there is never going to be recreated in that perfect sense ever again. Whereas when I can create music on a computer, when I play that back in 10 years, as long as I've got all the same plugins, it's going to sound exactly the damn same. Right. But there's no way when I set up a big patch on my modular or whatever, there's no way that's ever going to come out sounding exactly the same again. So you're capturing something unique for the project, which is really important.
Well, it seems like you're recreating kind of like it's the classic quality to it, the classic quality in the aspect of how like the performance is captured in a moment. The reason why bands are so popular is because they feel like they've kind of figured out this intuition to work with each other, but it's not because they have all the right plugins. It's because they know how to work with each other on the tangible, the analog, the actual physical sense. There is that kind of cohesive type of ecosystem going on there, and so I like that this is the approach you've taken for the synthesis, is because it's like, no, I didn't just buy this really cool plugin and played a guitar through it and that was it, or whatever. That you've literally taken sine waves, you've taken sound waves and manipulated them. Like,
yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, that's what I meant before too. Is it's like, you can't even call that an instrument. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't even know what it is.
Tool, it's like some kind of design going on.
Yeah, it's just a thing. It's just a musical thing. So,
but it does still end up getting played in rhythm and still goes with the music. So in some ways,
oh yeah, absolutely,
it's still
absolutely,
an instrument in some regards too.
Yeah, totally. I guess the thing with like plugins and stuff like that and running it in the box on the computer is that anybody can download those same plugins, set up the same sort of parameters, set up the same MIDI part, and have the same sound there. So if it's that easy to create, that's not kind of what I like to do. I would like to do stuff that I don't want to say like not what people haven't heard before or any of that sort of stuff, but it's just something unique to that project.
I think brand is a big deal when it comes to composers, and I think when somebody knows the type of person who can provide a unique sound, I think that's going down to the actual tools that you use and how you create that is pretty important. It sounds like it might even be somewhat overlooked, even in my own head. I've never really thought of, hey, I should see how I can mess with static sound, how I can mess with white noise. So,
yeah, well,
I may be seeing a lot more of this stuff in my budget now coming up, hitting up whatever pawn shops and whatever I could find for this kind of stuff.
Well, the cool stuff about that is like it doesn't really matter. We're not going for absolute pure audiophile type, perfection here. And so really some of the coolest sounds come out of the most cheap, nasty little bits of electronic equipment. It's really, really quite cool. So and like pedals and things like that. Pedals are pretty cheap. Pedals can be $200, $300, and that's a poor studio engineer's hardware right there. You don't need a big $6,000 compressor, for example. You can get a guitar pedal, and it's still going to compress in a very interesting way. It's not going to be super high audiophile quality, but it's going to be an interesting thing. And when I run stuff through analog equipment, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that does something interesting. Whenever I load up a plug-in compressor, I'm like, yep, that's compressing the sound. That's doing what I want it to do. That's absolutely fine, but it's not interesting. When I run it through a pedal or another bit of equipment or through a synth and then through a pedal or through some distortion box or through a cassette machine or whatever, VHS machine, it takes that drum from going boom, boom, boom to like, something really, really interesting, does something to the sound. It smacks it, it abuses it, and that's kind of interesting.
Well, I think what we can take away from all this is that when you're listening to Doom and when you're playing it, if you have noticed that you're hearing these crazy sounds, that you can know that it wasn't just simply created with sitting down and hitting a few buttons. A lot of people make the joke about how electronic music is a guy just shows up to the show and pushes a button, pushes play, and it goes. That's not the case, but that's not even the actual reality of that type of music. But what's cool about what Mick's done here is that he's actually taken physical analog type of electrical circuits and created brand new sounds for that. So when you're thinking of how do I create sounds that symbolize hell and distort the very fabric of reality? That's exactly the approach you took, even down to the actual sound signals. So, any of you that have any interest in electronic sounds, possibly just beyond just enjoying those sounds, but in the process of creating those sounds, there's a lot of information there to take in and kind of study and maybe pattern what you're trying to learn from what Mick Gordon has done. And so, who knows, you might be able to come up with some cool stuff as well. At the end of the day, it's a cool look at the symbolism behind the actual creation of the sound for Doom, so I thought it was pretty cool. All right, now back to the rest of the interview. As an experience altogether, it's a super cohesive, super fun, and I'm just absolutely stoked about the music that's in this, man. I just am so thrilled to hear what you've done with it and that it supports the whole Doom experience so well, and also justifying how much hype I had for it. So I do get that part of it. It's like, yes, okay, we get why you were so excited. I feel in some ways that yes, now I am justified in how excited
That's super cool, man. Super happy about that. That's really great.
So, and with Doom, everything you've accomplished with that, we've heard your work in Wolfenstein, and we've heard your work in Killer Instinct, and for Need for Speed, and some of the trailers, and the body of work that you've had over recent years. Do you feel like there's any kind of principle of work that you kind of put into focus that kind of keeps you keeping things fresh or keeping it interesting and exciting for you? Like what types of things could you shine light on that's kind of like is the basis for what keeps you excited as a composer?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, man. I appreciate that question. That's really, really cool. I don't know. I kind of, as I mentioned kind of earlier, try to look for projects that allow an opportunity to have an interesting musical experience. I'm not really interested in just doing sort of background music that sits there. I mean, obviously those things serve their role, as we said too. It has a function. It's an emotional, subconscious thing that sits in the background, and that's really, really cool. I like stuff that's up front and gives me an opportunity to tap into other emotions. As I said before too, I'm a big fan of the kind of 90s approach where they just wrote cool songs. It was just stuff that you could listen to on its own. I remember like the sort of MechWarrior soundtracks and things that you could, sorry, not the soundtrack, but I mean the MechWarrior disc, right? That you could, take it out of the computer and just put it in a CD player and you could listen to the music on its own.
Oh yeah, and Killer Cuts is one thing I had.
Oh yeah, absolutely, right? Yeah, the cuts, yeah, MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries, the Red Alert games that Frank did. I mean, just amazing sort of soundtracks. So kind of look for those modern experiences in that regard. Obviously, Wolfenstein has its own thing. It's a very defined universe. It's a very like alternative universe, and where Nazis have kind of won World War II, and it's kind of got its own sort of broken Americana type feel. Lots of acoustic guitars and stuff like that, so it's kind of cool. Killer Instinct was its own thing as well. Killer Instinct was really cool because you knew that the player would have to listen to that one piece of music a lot. Every single time they play that level, they're going to hear that music. So that's a lot of listening. And it's very, very, very difficult to write a piece of music that people don't mind listening to over and over and over again. But I really appreciate that challenge. And I appreciate that people can pick up the game and play that and enjoy that music or whatever to the point where it just sits in the background anyway. And they're focusing on their gameplay. And the music's there just kind of like their cheer squad, It's just like, pushing them on, pushing them even further. And I appreciate what you said about Doom there too, where you're like headbanging and stuff like that. That means that's the thing, like the music is your cheer squad. It's getting behind you, it's encouraging you, and that's the kind of role that I like to play with music, I think. So yeah, I don't know, man. That's a super cool question. I don't know if that's like the best answer. I hope so.
No, mission accomplished. I mean, yeah, I think that what you do with Wolfenstein as well. Like, I've seen the gameplay of Wolfenstein, didn't get to play the newer ones, and then with Killer Instinct, I've watched a ton of gameplay footage because I was watching that, and I noticed that there was a few things that showed, like, just different themes and that sort of thing. So I'm pretty sure I spent a couple hours browsing through Killer Instinct stuff, and just hearing what you've done there. Wolfenstein just had this huge sound to it, where the big choirs, this sort of thing, kind of what I was secretly hoping you were going to infuse somehow into Doom in a way, and you accomplished it. But it came out as even more brutal, and it just supports the feel. So I love that. Killer Instinct. When you have that type of music that you got to write, is it something that maybe happened a little earlier in your career where you found that you had to find this new challenge of how do I create something that's not going to become grating? Or is that something that people will still send it back to you and you don't notice? Because I would think that if you're writing something, it would be kind of a challenge to know exactly what is going to become too repetitive for somebody, or is that kind of just an instinct that you've instinct? Ah, is
Oh,
that
good.
is that was it? Oh my good lord!
That
But is
was
that
killer, bro.
yeah, killer instinct, dude? Where is that something that you kind of just know as you're doing it now, that you can kind of tell as you're creating it that it's like, okay, now it's getting too repetitive for the kind of tight knit parameters that this kind of loop is
Oh
going to be
man,
playing?
I wish I could tell. I mean, it's really honestly, you raise a really, really fantastic point there because it's very difficult to tell when something's going to work or not. And honestly, you do not know, and you don't know until you send it out into the world, and then people actually get a chance to experience it. You just don't. Now, of course, there's a couple of things that we do with that. Number one is both Killer Instinct and Doom feature a dynamic music system, so the music is always a little bit different. So whenever you play that Killer Instinct level, it is the same piece of music, but the arrangement is different. So where the verse happens, where the chorus happens, and things like that is always a little bit different. So that's kind of one way to do it. It kind of removes that predictability. Predictability is a curse, and it's also a blessing. What I mean by that is that if the music is so predictable that the player is sitting there going, "Oh, I know where this is going to happen. Oh, look, here comes the drop. Yeah, there we go, bang." It's kind of, it can get on the nose pretty quickly. At the same time, though, you don't want to be throwing stuff at the player that they don't expect too much, because they just become kind of disconnected to the experience, right?
Right.
So yeah, so there's that sort of thing. So it's a fine line, that balance of predictability. Do I know? I don't think so. I try to, like, whenever I sit down to try and write a piece of music, it's always I try to sit down and write the themes first. So I remember, like, reading interviews with like Paul McCartney and stuff, and they'd say like the best song, they can just sit down and play it on piano and have a singer and something like that, right? And you still recognize that song. A really good analogy I like to use is that when somebody whistles a melody, so you might whistle like "Don't Worry, Be Happy" or something like that, right? And everybody knows that song straight away just by whistling it. And that's all it is. It's a whistle. It's like the most bare, human expression of a musical instrument is whistling.
Right.
And to be able to whistle "Don't Worry, Be Happy" and then everybody knows what that song is, that's just Bobby McFerrin bliss there. That's brilliant. So try to get to the point where we can sit down first and just have a melody and chords that you could represent in any way and still recognize it as that tune. And I find if you can get something that sort of resembles music at that stage, you're kind of off on a good path to begin with. Then it's just like hours and hours and hours of all sorts of sonic goodness to try and make it sound good. Obviously, you don't want it to sound grating. Doom is a fine balance, I think, with that. It's a challenge. Sometimes it's really super aggressive, and it's difficult to not make that grating after a while. If you're not predisposed to those sort of aggressive tones in your own music habits, when you're listening experiences and things, it might be a bit too much. So that's always a bit of a challenge. But you can do sort of things like that too, and just with arrangements and tweaking certain frequencies and stuff like that, so it's not too grating.
When you talk about hours and hours, about how long of a work day do you think you normally put in when it's just like when you actually sit down to create some of this music? I know you call it music design, and I'm sure that kind of goes into a lot of it, because I feel like the melody, you may know that right at the bat, and who knows, sometimes melodies can come pretty quickly if you happen to just be inspired enough to nail something out. Do you feel like maybe the music design and all that sonic goodness added to it, it ends up taking more of your workday compared to the actual core of finding out, a correct melody?
My favorite quote is like the first 80% takes 80% of the time, and the remaining 20% takes 80% of the time.
Okay, there you go.
It's just yeah. Like that. It's nonstop. I don't know, man. Like, it just depends. Sometimes, as you said, you're a composer as well, so you know exactly what I'm talking about, and I appreciate that question, of course, as a result. Like, sometimes this sort of stuff does happen really quickly. Sometimes, like, literally, I remember like with Killer Instinct with Thunder, Hinamatum, Thunder's theme. I kind of just, shut down the computer. I went for a walk to get a bite to eat, and this melody just like popped straight in my head, like bam, and like just comes out of nowhere. I have no idea how that sort of stuff happens. No idea. And I mean, like, melody, chords, arrangement, everything. It was just like bam, just like a wind had come through and just whacked me in the head, and there it was. It's kind of cool. But what I've kind of started to be able to not predict, but figure out in a way, is that stuff tends to happen more if I can get my subconscious thinking about it. So to get to that point I'd already been on a big, trip to Yosemite and done a big hike through Yosemite and done a whole bunch of like Native American experiences and stuff like that, and bought a whole bunch of like cedar flutes and things. Was learning a whole bunch of that sort of. So you just immerse yourself in the culture to the point where your subconscious is thinking about it. You're dreaming about it. I was dreaming about Yosemite. I was dreaming about like flying around as a bird and climbing trees and stuff like that. And when you get to that point, I think you're able to receive those ideas more quickly or in a better, more pure way, I guess, rather than trying to force them out. Of course, it's difficult when you're trying to force stuff out. But then that can be the experimentation phase too. If you don't have an idea, sometimes just sitting down and screwing around with plugins and sounds and synths and guitars and whatever can yield interesting results, and you can start to build tracks around that as well.
I love that we could even go down like a philosophical conversation about, what exactly it takes to hit that moment of inspiration and what opens your subconscious to receive those types. Because it's almost like it almost does seem like it's something that you just kind of receive, like it just came out of nowhere. If you're going to buy a sandwich, you're not exactly sitting in front of your station to work on something. But if it hits you, it seems like there could be so much more involved with the concept of that. And it almost seems like there's some science that we don't know about yet anyway that would seem to explain that type of thing, because it happens a lot. You hear about that a lot, this moment of inspiration, and sometimes it catches you by surprise. Sounds like you were just grabbing a sandwich or something, and then all of a sudden, boom. Like,
yeah, I wish it would happen a lot. That'd be great if it happened a lot more. Yeah, I don't know why. It's just that's what seems to work for me. I can't get an email through on Friday where somebody says, oh, can you write us a piece of music in 2 hours or whatever. Like I probably could do that, and I could have something where you fall back onto habits. You go to the things you go to the chord progressions you go to the melodies that you like, and you just kind of come up with something like that. But I always feel that's like not a cheap way of doing it, but it doesn't get to the pureness of what you're trying to represent musically. And when, especially in Killer Instinct, where we had a character as strong as Hinamatum or Thunder, that's a really strong character there. That's a really strong culture. That's a really strong legacy. So, it needs to be something that's a little bit more interesting than just something that's thrown together. Of course, the downside of that is that a lot of the stuff that we do is to a deadline. So you actually have a very strict date that you have to meet so the game ships on time.
Right.
And you cannot just be sitting around waiting for inspiration to smack you in the face to write, You can't be waiting for like an hour before the deadline is due and then go, no, still haven't got anything. What do we do next? It's not a reliable process, basically.
Right. So it would be a huge, breakthrough for humanity if we had some way to be able to quantify, inspiration will hit about this point and under these circumstances. And we get, just line up whatever parts of the solar system are in place and what type of energy.
What I've noticed additionally to that is that like those ideas don't happen at the computer, at the workstation. They don't happen there. They always happen away from it. And I don't know if there's something about computers or whatever, but I think computers are just like really super distracting. There's just constant distractions. So what I mean by distractions is it can be like, I'm not even just talking about the social media or stuff like that, but I mean just like, you click on something, crash or blue screen or whatever, or this fails, or this plugin needs an update or whatever. And it's all this stuff that gets in between you and the idea that you're trying to get around, down. And then when you walk away from the computer, your brain has no distractions and is free to roam and free to do its own thing. So I find when going for a walk or, going to grab a bite to eat or even just like taking a shower, right? Sure. The moment you jump in the shower muse, right? The bathroom muse is usually where the best ideas come from.
I remember a lot of great ideas have come from the shower. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Even that E1M1 remake, the kind of redo. I just didn't want to do like a straight remake of E1M1 because that already exists in the world. E1M1 exists in the world as itself, obviously in Doom 1993. And then like so many people have done iterations of that and reversions of that and remixes of that as well. So I didn't just want to do the same thing. We wanted to kind of do our own version. And I remember just like walking in and, turning on the hot water and then it just kind of popped in my head. I was like, hey, that'll work. That's it,
And then you're able to, you kind of have the skill of, because it seems like there's a skill behind retaining that moment of inspiration, actually going and put it down. Is that something you kind of had to like get better?
Yeah,
at?
the skill is, totally. The skill is
like writing it down. Like comedians will have to write stuff down before they forget, So when you have an idea, do you have to hurry and jump at your music and get it?
Yeah, I mean, the skill as I was saying is like not slipping on the tiles when you're running through the house completely butt naked to try and find a guitar or something to get that out.
Making sure a window
down. Yeah. The worst ones, man, are when like the ideas that pop into your head literally the split second before you fall asleep. And it can be like 5 a.m., you've been up all night working crazy, and you lie down to go to sleep, and then bam, something happens in your head, and you're like, all right, cool, guess we're going to be up for another few hours. And because if you fall asleep, that idea is gone. And so many times I've had like a really cool melody in my head, gone to sleep, wake up, and it's just like a desert in my brain. It's just there is just wind and tumbleweeds and a vulture, and I'm like, there was something here a few hours ago, but it's not here anymore. So
Complete ghost town, and there's just nothing there when it used to be.
Totally got to get up.
Yeah. I can see how that the thought process of when moments of inspiration actually come to you and when to know how to do it. I think you'd probably have to be pretty disciplined and be able to recognize when it happens to know that it's time for you to hurry and go put it down. That I find that a lot of these famous songwriters and musicians have always talked about this type of thing hitting them. And I think it's a good point that you bring up that the computers can be kind of a distraction because maybe it's just the amount of choice that we have, the kind of like mentality of looking in the fridge, thinking you had nothing to eat, even though there's like 20 things in front of you. Maybe it's that same type of deal where it's like there's this huge world of choices on this computer, but now I'm distracted with all that when really I should be kind of living as much as I can in life, outdoors or experiencing things, that type of thing. So I have some material to work with.
Exactly. Hans Zimmer said something really interesting in an interview recently where he said, like, he doesn't even approach the computer if he doesn't have an idea, an intention. So you have to go to the computer with an intention. You have to go, right, I'm going there to lay down this chord with this synth patch, with this lead on top. I already know what I'm going to do. Yeah. I find if I just open it up and I open up a Ableton session and I grab 4 bars and I loop and I just start throwing things in there, it's like, yeah, you can like start to carve something after a while, and it is music and you can't argue against that. And sometimes that stuff certainly has its role as well, but certainly those like really, really cool ideas happen away from the computer.
That makes sense. I think it was Maynard James Keenan, singer of Tool, guy who I respect a lot. I have since I was a kid, but I think he was talking about, I'll probably screw up the quote, but he was saying something like, you need to live so you have something to write about.
Yeah.
So it makes sense because if you're experiencing things, you kind of understand the layers and the symbolism of the music, so that when you go to sit down with something, even like Doom, I mean, even like the aspect, everybody has an aspect of them that wants to be a survivor, that wants to kind of, to triumph over adversity, this type of stuff. Not just like the new agey inspirational aspect of it, but just the very essence of survival in mankind, I think, is in all of us. And so when you have an experience like Doom, where it's put right up to the front, and that is kind of the core focus of the gameplay, that I think there is a bit of your own life experience that resonates when you create the music. I mean, there's a reason why it's so good. There has to be something in there that from just, living life, creating the correct kind of symbolism and how to convey that the best type of way. Obviously, Doom is a very exaggerated, sensationalized kind of, telling of that concept. But I think that's what art is. It's like the whole idea that we're going to take these stories, make something that's very compelling to watch, and in this case of video games, play. And then when it comes to the music, that we have our own life experiences to put in that. And I think that's when the best stuff comes out.
Well, that's cool too. Exactly. It means something different to every single person, and that's great. I mean, that's a real blessing, because every time somebody sits down to play a game or read a book or watch a movie or whatever, they get different things out of it, different meanings. And so many times, like, I mean, even we've had discussions with that. Like you sit down, you try and discuss what that movie meant to you, or what a film meant to you, or something like that. And what you picked up on it and things. And that stuff's really, really, really quite cool. Everybody gets a different experience out of that, especially video games as well. So. Yeah, really good point, man.
Well, being the full interactive experience, you're kind of completely engaging with, audio and visual, and then you're actually interacting with what's going on screen. It's this medium where we have, endless potential for storytelling, and even it's just amazing that even in something that just on the surface appears to be a shooter, that deep down there are layers and the symbolism of the audio to support it and create such an awesome experience. And so I just, want to tell everybody, especially you, and then the sound team at Bethesda and id. I'm not sure how the work was divided up between Bethesda and id, honestly, if it's there's publisher versus developer, but anybody who was involved with the music and the audio implementation of this game just hit it right on the money, man.
Cool, man. I'm glad to pick up on that. I really appreciate that. That's awesome.
Well, so for anything that's coming up for you, or any ways for us to check out stuff that you have coming up, because obviously, anybody who's listening to Doom is going to become a fan who pays, even half of a fraction of a second of the music is going to know that this is some good shit, and that it's definitely worth checking out your website, seeing your other bodies of work. Is it just direct them over to mickgordon.com with let's see, Mick-Gordon? Is that the...
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, or just type it into Google, whatever's cool.
Sure.
Yeah, hit me up on Twitter or any of that sort of stuff. Just at Mick_Gordon on Twitter is really cool.
So Mick Gordon on Twitter, and then Mick-Gordon.com to check out more of Mick Gordon's work. And so, yeah, with everything related to that, Mick, I just want to tell you a huge thanks for talking to me about Doom and about these other projects you've done, because I'm a huge fan of yours. I've respected your work for a long time. When I found out you were doing Doom, it got me even more excited. And I feel like it's just cool to hear your philosophy behind it. I think that's a huge part as to why it was pulled off so well.
Oh man, that makes me feel awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. I really appreciate it, buddy.
And I guess for everybody else, go to mickgordon.com, follow Mick on Twitter. Thanks for listening to Game Turn Audio, and I will be at you guys in about a week. Peace out.